Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be taking a look at a presentation that was released about the Giants Engine 10 for Farming Simulator 25, which is the new engine that the game will run on and includes things like ground deformation, water physics, weather effects, shadows and much more. So let's start taking a look at everything, as there's plenty of stuff to go over. Okay, starting out we have an overview of everything that we'll be seeing, and I'll get straight into the first thing, which is improved fog. So you'll see we have non-uniform density, which means that the fog will form in different densities around the map. Then there's dynamic accumulation in valleys and water, which will make the fog form differently over water and in valleys to other areas of the map. Then changing with weather and time of day is exactly what it says it is, so there's no point explaining that one. And here we have a bit of gameplay that shows us some fog over different areas of the map, and gives us an idea of how what I just spoke about helps create it. So in this clip of the river, you'll see there's just a layer of fog above the water, which is probably better to describe as a mist than fog, because it's very thin. But either way it does look really good. And here we can see there's a lot of fog in the valley behind the bridge, but this side of it is pretty clear. So that's how the non-uniform density and dynamic accumulation can make the fog vary in different areas. And the main thing I like about the fog is how it brings the weather conditions to life. For instance, this low-lying fog is something you'd expect to see over a field on an early morning. So to have the fog create that atmosphere is really nice, as it just adds to the realism and immersion of the game. And what we're seeing here looks to be more late morning, where the fog is beginning to thin out as it breaks down. So obviously that's where the changing with time and weather comes into effect. Now for the next couple of details, we have volumetric lighting with sun shadows and God rays, which basically means the sunlight will make the fog brighter in places, while the shaded areas will be darker. Then the God rays allow for rays of light to shine through trees and other things. And we can see how that looks in these clips. So here we have the rays of sunlight coming through the trees with some very heavy and dark fog behind them. And then here we can see how the sun is shining through the fog and really brightening it up behind this tree, which creates this fantastic looking scene. Then we have some rays of sunlight coming through this tower, with the house creating a shaded area. So yeah, it's nice to have these effects, as it makes the sunlight and fog look a lot more natural. And then we also have volumetric lighting for local lights, vehicles, street lamps, etc. So what that will do is create a cone of light in the fog, but also allow for the whole area the light is covering to be lit up. And we can see here how the street lamp is illuminating the whole area where the visible cone of light is hitting. Plus there's a slight haze in the light from the fog. And in this tractor's lights, the fog becomes a lot more visible as it's denser. So it's very realistic how the fog interacts with the lights. Working in the night will be a bit more difficult when it's foggy as well, because the visibility will be lower than usual. But I do like the fact that we'll be affected by the fog, because we've needed to see the weather have more of an impact on the gameplay for a while. And we can see that even of a daytime the visibility isn't great in the fog, so it's actually going to be challenging to work in these weather conditions at day or night. Now moving on to the second thing in this presentation, we have dynamic shadows, and we're starting with the cloud shadows, which are fully dynamic based on actual clouds. So that means the shadows on the ground are actually created from the clouds we see in the game. And in this gameplay we can see what the shadows look like on the ground, and how they move across the land just like they would in real life. Plus with them being based off the actual clouds, obviously the amount of shadows on the ground changes with how much cloud there is. So we get different variations of shadows depending on what's happening in the sky above, which I think is pretty cool. Also, these shadows are just another effect that helps create a more realistic environment in the game. And with it being a simulator, anything that makes it look and feel as real as possible to play is always a good thing. Okay, now we're moving on to soft shadows. So the further away from the blocker, the blurrier the shadows become, and with overcast sky, the shadows become softer. And we can see the effects of them in these screenshots, with the top one having a shadow coming off the pillar that is much clearer and more defined closer to it, then further away it becomes blurry. Then in these bottom two screenshots, we can see how the left one has a very clear shadow of the tree, showing every branch and leaf, and in the right one, the tree's shadow is very blurred and much softer. So that's how the light levels and distance from an object can diffuse the shadows to make them behave in a natural way. Next up we have screen space shadows, which fix regular shadow artifacts and add shadows to non-casting objects. So what this does is add small shadows to things like this fence. And here's what it looks like without them, which is what we're used to seeing in FS22. Then this is what it looks like with them. So you'll see it makes quite a noticeable difference once the shadows are added, as they give things more depth and detail. And again, this is with them off, then this is with them back on. Like I said, it makes quite a difference. Adding these small details shows how much Giants have done to make the game look the best it can as well. So that's the main thing I like about it. Moving on, we have shadows for vehicles and merged shadow lights. And you'll see in this screenshot how the lights from the tractor face in the class are actually creating a shadow behind it. So the vehicle lights will have the ability to create shadows in FS25. Then here we get a breakdown showing where the light is going and how it's being blocked to make the shadow. Okay, now we're going on to weather effects. And we're starting with additional mud on tyres, which unlike dirt is reduced when driving. And here we can see the different types of mud for the tyres. So the top two are what we're used to seeing in FS22, with the tyres being clean and having dirt on them. Then the bottom two are new for FS25, with the left one having some mud actually starting to build up and stick to the tyre. And the right one has even more stuck on it, to the point where the mud's pretty much level with the tyre tread. So that must be the most amount of mud we can get on them. We know that the mud will reduce while we drive as well, and Giants did say that we'll actually see bits of mud falling off the tyres onto the road, which is a really nice addition to the effect. Okay, next we have rain effects on vehicles, water droplets on machines, and tyre colour darkens when wet. And we can see here how the tyres are much darker and shinier than usual, which actually makes them look wet. So yeah, if it's raining or we drive through water, the tyres will change and look like this. Then of course they'll slowly go back to the normal colour as they dry. If you look closely, there are some water droplets on the tyres and other parts of the tractor as well. And they do look really good, so it'll be nice to see them on our vehicles and equipment in the rain. Next up we have improved rain visuals, with rain splashes and wet look, with things changing to a darker colour and becoming more reflective. So the same as what happens to the tyres. And in this screenshot we have some pretty heavy rain coming down, which is very different to the rain we're used to in FS22. If you look at the floor, we can see how the rain splashes off it as well. Then just like the tyres, the rain has also made the road become darker and put a shine on it, which again gives it the look of being wet. Okay, now we're going on to vehicles, and we're starting with interactive water simulation, which we have some gameplay of that here to take a look at. So you'll see we get these waves and ripples in the water as the tractor drives through it. And if the tractor stops or turns, the water reacts to that with the waves and ripples moving in different directions. And I think it's very important that water had these effects added to make it react in a natural way, because it's going to be a big part of FS25 due to the flooded fields. There's definitely a couple of things I'd like to see added to the water though, such as splashes and more of a muddy mixture happening around the wheels. But still, at least we're getting water physics in the game, and I think this is a good starting point for it to be improved on, which I'm sure it will be over time or before the game's released. Okay, next we have physically based calibration, and this is quite an interesting one, as Giants have actually used a machine to get the colours of vehicles and equipment, which means the machinery in game will be an exact match of the real life colour, instead of just being made to look as close to the colour as possible. So that is very impressive. Next we have another addition to the paint, and that's the clear coat layer, which is a transparent layer that goes on top of the base coat of paint to not only protect it, but also give it a glossy and reflective shine. So as what vehicles have on them in real life. And here we can see some examples of scratches, which are going to work slightly different now because of this clear coat. So there's a deep paint scratch that goes right through to the primer and takes us back to the body, a paint scratch that goes through to the base coat leaving only the primer, and lastly is a clear coat scratch that goes through the clear coat exposing the base coat. Then we can see how dirt and snow will sit on top of this clear coat layer. And here we have a shot of a tractor without the clear coat, which is pretty much what we're used to seeing in FS22. Then this is what it looks like with the clear coat added to it. So you'll see it has a much shinier finish to it, and things are reflecting off the paintwork. And if we go back to without the clear coat, there's hardly anything reflecting off the paint, and it looks quite dull. Then with it on, it's just so much more shiny, and it's reflecting everything off it, which definitely looks a lot more real. So yeah, I really like the addition of the clear coat. Right, now we're moving on to terrain, and we have higher terrain resolution, 1 meter, and displacement mapping, 12.5 centimeters. Now, I'm not really sure what these things mean, but obviously they're going to improve the terrain and make it look better. And this screenshot shows the terrain layout from a developer's point of view. Right, now we're getting into one of the most talked about features in FS25, which is ground deformation. So we have displacement mapping for fields and influences physics simulation. And the physics simulation means that driving over things like this ploughed field will actually cause the tractor to bounce around. Anyway, this screenshot shows the field before any ground deformation has taken place, with this one showing a more in-depth analysis of that. Then here we can see something has drove across the field which has caused these tyre tracks or ground deformation to happen. And it does say there is dynamic adjustment from tyres and gameplay, so maybe different styles of tyres will leave different tracks, and heavier vehicles could even cause deeper tracks. But I don't know for sure because this is the only information we got about it. And until we find out more, we won't know what extent the ground deformation goes to. However, it's nice that we're definitely getting some sort of ground deformation in the game, as it's been a highly requested feature for a long time. Moving on, we have tree rendering, with 360 billboards, parallax correction, shadows in distance, and shadow proxy mesh. And there is a couple of screenshots here that show the number of verticals and verticals in shadows for these trees. But basically we'll be getting better looking trees and shadows. Next we have improved sky, with a starlit sky and enhanced moon. And in this screenshot we can see that the moon is very bright but also has a lot of detail to it. And of course there's stars all over the sky. So the night skies will look a lot better now with the added detail. Moving on to performance improvements, we've got double-sided rendering and less verticals for thin objects. And then we have some footage that shows how these make the crops look in FS25. So straight away you'll notice that they're much denser compared to 22, which makes it look more like a real crop. Then here we get a close-up look at the crop, with the double-sided rendering being turned on and off, so we can see exactly what it does to the look of them. And it's very noticeable how much thinner the crop becomes when it's turned off, so it definitely makes a huge difference to the look of the crop. You'll see there's no gaps where we can see the ground either, so that's a big improvement from FS22. Then we also have the double-sided rendering and less verticals for thin objects on trees, so we'll be seeing denser trees with more leaves and branches on them. And again here we can see the double-sided rendering being turned on and off, which just like with the crops makes a huge difference to the look of the trees, with the extra leaves filling them up a lot more and actually covering the branches, making them less visible. And not being able to see every branch or even as many gaps between them certainly makes the trees look much better. So the double-sided rendering is a really nice addition. There's also a lot more tree types in FS25, which we get to see some of here. And it's good that we're getting a bit more variety, because then we won't be seeing the same trees all over the map. So yeah, it'll be nice to see some different styles of trees around. Okay, for the next performance improvements, there's geometry size compression, automatic internal compression reduces vertex data, example data size, Giants Engine 10 reduces geometry size from 8 MB to 4.5 MB, and reduces slot count. So I'm not exactly sure what all that means, but either way it will give us better performance and reduce the slot count, which is always helpful. Next is virtual texturing for terrain, and cheaper terrain rendering, especially displacement and parallax mapping. Again, I don't really understand this, but for those of you that do, this is what we're getting. Okay, then there's projected decals and no geometry for streets, and there's a couple of screenshots here to look at. So this is an in-depth graph of the road, and in this one here the road has these interesting curve markings. Then we can see how the road blends together with this dirt track, and also the tyre tracks coming onto the road, which do look really good. Okay, now we have blending with terrain. Remove transition between terrain and object. So pretty much everything will blend together and look like it's in the ground rather than on top of it. And that was the last thing in this presentation, so there's no more information to go over now. But we did get quite a lot of information about the things that are coming with the new Giants Engine 10, which personally I'm very impressed by what we got to see, and I certainly think FS25 is going to be by far the best farming simulator we've ever got, because there's just so many cool things that have been added to the game, and the level of detail Giants have put into it is incredible. Plus, all of what we're seeing is still a work in progress, so it's only going to get better by the time it's released. And it already looks fantastic, so I can't wait to see what it actually looks like once it's out. Anyway, that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know by leaving a like and feel free to subscribe so you never miss another video.